The main premise of Fire Country is that it's a show about redemption, and it's not hard to see that. It's in literally all of the marketing, and it's the premise of 3 Rock, a place where men who have committed crimes go to serve a community. One thing that's often overlooked, though, is that these are not people who have committed minor crimes, like using drugs or petty theft. No, many of the people at 3 Rock have committed very serious offenses. Manny stole cars until he got into a drunk driving accident. Freddie was accused of robbing a jewelry store. Cole got in a fistfight that ended in someone dying. And Audrey stole a car, inadvertently kidnapping a baby in the process. Our main character, Bode, is no exception. When we meet him, he is 2 years into a 5-year sentence for armed robbery. In that very first scene of the show, we see Bode's parole hearing, which ends in a denial, and Bode's attorney, who had hoped he would be successful, recommends that he join the inmate firefighter program to show that he deserves a second chance. This feels like a classic redemption story. Someone knows Bode deserves redemption, but now we, the audience, as well as the parole board, have to see that too. Honestly, though, I can't help but thinking Bode getting parole at that first hearing was a bit of a stretch. He hadn't served his mandatory minimum sentence yet, and granting parole to someone who committed an armed robbery during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic seems like a surefire way to get politicians riled up. Parole boards are politically appointed, so it's not like they would be blind to the optics of granting parole to somebody who, you're wondering how I know that Bode committed his crime in the height of the COVID-19 shutdowns. Well, the show premiered in 2022, and like I said, Bode has been in prison for 2 years, which makes his crime having been committed in 2020 when the shutdowns were happening. Okay, I get it. That's not enough information. Just because the show takes place in 2022 doesn't mean Bode's crime was intended to happen in 2020. I get it. I actually had a very lengthy section in this essay counting the time between episodes and some honestly really neat work throughout the timeline. But when I was grabbing a screen recording to do this, I realized that we see a map of the Buckeye Fire in the pilot, and it says right there that the episode takes place in August of 2022. We hear in that episode that the inmates were at training before they shipped out to 3 Rock, and obviously there was going to be paperwork. So when you put all that together, Bode probably committed his crime between March and May of 2020, right during the shutdowns were happening, notably during a period of time in which prosecutors were forced to make deals with people out of fear of court backlog, so that's why Bode only got 5 years for armed robbery. Going back to the events actually covered on screen, we see Bode apologize to his victim at his parole hearing. An episode later, he tells Manny that his victim read a letter during that hearing, hoping that Bode would turn his life around. Bode says it's the nicest thing that anyone has ever done for him, and it's something that he's not sure he deserves. So, to me, this sounds like the most important parts of redemption. Recognizing that one did something wrong and attempting to apologize to the injured party has already been done. If Bode is intended to redeem himself, it must be over something else. But I suppose that by the end of the first episode, before we hear this story, we already know that Bode isn't intended to redeem himself over the robbery. We hear Bode yell at Jake that while Bode blames himself for Riley's death, he blames Jake for breaking her heart and making the last emotion that she felt before she died be pain. 3 years after Riley's death, Bode robbed the liquor store to get money to pay for drugs to escape the voice in his head telling him that he should have died that night, not his little sister. I would say that overall, the fandom tends to treat Riley's death as a tragic accident, not something Bode needs to redeem himself over. And to be fair, that is how the show portrays it. Basically, no one except for Vince blames Bode for Riley's death, and even then, Vince really only verbalizes this blame on the night that Riley died. Nonetheless, Bode still has plenty of guilt and self-hatred that he never points at anyone else, including Jake. Like I said, fans just generally don't blame Bode for Riley's death. Over on Reddit, I've read quite a few discussions about who's at fault. Was it an accident with no one to blame? Was it Jake's fault for making Riley so upset that she got out of the car? Was it Riley's fault, a woman acting hysterical after a simple breakup? It depends on the day and the Redditor, but Bode never gets mentioned. He was driving, sure, but for most fans, this was just an accident. It makes sense that no one in universe blames Bode. The only people who know what happened in the truck that night are Bode and Riley, and obviously Riley isn't here to tell us what happened. Luke tells Vince it was an accident, and Luke was the captain of the shift that night, so it is fair for people to take his word as fact. Bode was never charged with a crime, even though, like I said in the Riley essay, the cops were there that night and could have arrested him. So, Bode isn't responsible for Riley's death in a legal sense, but there's a whole range of things that happen between guilty of vehicular manslaughter and a freak accident. To tell where Riley's death lies in that spectrum, we're going to need to dig down into that scene of them in the truck and break it down beat by beat, just like I did with the night Riley died. Our looks at the night Riley died come from the season 1 episodes The Fresh Prince of Edgewater and Where There's Smoke. Riley's birthday party is in The Fresh Prince of Edgewater, and her actual death comes in Where There's Smoke. I already went over Riley's party in her video, so here's a quick recap. We see Jake, Eve, Bode, Riley, Vince, and Sharon at the party. Riley and Jake go off to talk, and we learn that Jake and Riley have been together secretly for a couple of months. The only reason Bode finds out is because he walks over there and sees Riley in tears. She begs Bode not to tell their parents and says that she has been waiting until things got more serious, something that would never happen. We also see Jake carrying on like nothing happened. We don't really know what happened between Riley crying at her birthday party and Riley crying in Bode's car. We know she ended up at Jake's house, but how is unclear. We know that she called Vince, even though she had intended to hide the relationship from him. I assume her next call was to Bode, not Sharon, as we never hear of Sharon having gotten a call from her the night she died. In the pilot, after Bode punches Jake, he tells Eve that by the time he got to Jake's place, Riley was already crying. It's not clear if Bode and Jake had a conversation that night. By the time we pick up, we see Bode and Riley in Bode's truck. Bode is yelling at her that she should have known that Jake would cheat on her, and Riley is still texting Jake. Bode tells her to stop. Riley wants to go back and talk to Jake, but Bode tells her no, he is taking her home. Riley says that she wants to get out, and Bode refuses to let her. Then Riley decides she is going to make him let her out by opening the door, but again, Bode doesn't stop. It's not until Riley has started to get out of the car that Bode reaches over to pull her back in and tries to stomp on the brakes. But his brakes fail. The truck leaves the road, and it seems like they hit a tree. But, this isn't entirely clear, since in Vince's flashback, the truck is shown to be on the road. I suppose it is possible that the truck rolled downhill and landed where it did. So this probably isn't vehicular manslaughter, and it's very possible that Bode's brakes would have failed even if he had tried to let her out of the car when she asked. But that doesn't erase the fact that he blamed her for not predicting that Jake would cheat on her, that he yelled at her when she was distraught, or that he refused to let her out of the car until she forced his hand by opening the door. And that's what led to her death. But starting at Fresh Prince of Edgewater, the show makes it quite clear that this is indeed what Bode needs to redeem himself for, not his actual crime. After Bode has a nightmare about the night Riley died, he has a conversation with Manny. In the prior episode, another one-on-one conversation, Manny had guessed that Bode heard Vince's voice telling him that he wasn't good enough. Bode confirms here that he does hear his dad's voice in his head, but what it's saying is that Bode should have died in the accident, not Riley. A number of episodes in the Bode is Back arc show moments of Bode feeling like he needs to redeem himself for his sister's death. In Where There's Smoke, Sharon has her first visit with Bode at 3 Rock, and Bode tells her that his goal is to save as many lives as possible. In that episode's rescue, Bode, Vince, and Manny convince Mojave, a drug dealer who was a friend of Bode's and seemingly a rival to Sharon's stepdad, Wes Fox, to let them escape from a forest fire. Bode tells Mojave that if he's responsible for someone's death, that he will never forgive himself. Even though Bode did go up on the mountain to save Vince and Jake, it wasn't because Bode cared about them. On the contrary, it was because he hated them. Bode hates Vince just as much in the next episode, but Vince's life is once again on the line. This time he convinces Manny to hotwire a forklift, which they use to help move debris after the building collapsed, and they save Vince. Later that night, Bode admits to Gabriella that he does care about his dad. A few episodes later, in Bad Guy, Bode keeps Vince from getting into a car to save a kid. It's generally believed that if anyone got in that car, it will go over the edge, but Vince wants to try anyway. Bode manages to talk his dad down, but when the kid wakes up and panics that he killed his sister, Bode jumps in the car to push the kid out of the car, which does indeed cause the car to go over the edge with Bode inside. Thankfully, though, we see in the next episode that Gabriella jumped off the bridge to save him. When Bode wakes up after almost drowning, he tells Gabriella that she shouldn't have jumped in to save him, but she said that she was inspired by seeing him get in the car to save Sam, a complete stranger. As Bode and Gabs are trying to get to safety, they stumble upon Meg, the person who caused the accident. The two try to help get her to safety, but when Gabriella collapses, Bode has to decide which woman to save, and Meg dies. 2 episodes after that, in Mama Bear, Bode tricks Manny into letting him get tested to see if he is a kidney match for Sharon. Bode had offered to donate his kidney 5 episodes earlier in Like Old Times, but it isn't until Get Your Hopes Up that Sharon is cleared for transplant and people start getting tested in the next episode, which is Mama Bear. Fun fact, my best friend considers this to be the only time Bode has ever been responsible. He hasn't seen the season 3 finale, I Do It Again, so he doesn't know that Bode saved over 100 people evacuating Buena Vista, or at least that's what happened as of time of writing, 5 days before season 4 premiered. By the next episode, Two Pink Lines, no one had stepped forward to say that they are a kidney match, and Bode does it in that episode's rescue. At first, Sharon refuses, but Bode insists, saying that saving Sharon's life will even the score. Vince tells him there is no score to be settled. Nonetheless, Sharon agrees to let Bode move forward in the donation process. We learn in the next episode, You Know Your Dragon Best, that if Bode does donate, he will have to go back to prison while he recovers. When Jake learns this, he steps up to offer his kidney, and that upsets Bode. Throughout the season, Bode constantly feels like Jake has usurped him within the Leone family, and now Bode feels like Jake is doing it again. But by the end of the episode, Bode decides that it doesn't matter who saves Sharon. All that matters is that someone does, and Jake is right. Him going back to prison will hurt his parents. So that should be the end of it, right? Vince has forgiven Bode, Bode has forgiven Jake, all's good, right? But we know it isn't. Jake tries to save Sharon's life, but he has an allergic reaction to the anesthesia, and Luke ends up being the one to save Sharon's life. Also, there are still 9 episodes left in season 1, and at least another 50 episodes of the show, if we're going to run all the way through the end of season 4, so I guess all is not. Well, let me think for a moment. Bode offered his kidney to apologize for what he did to hurt his parents, and seems to have extended forgiveness to Jake. So on paper, yeah, we're all good. But think about Bode's arc when it comes to the robbery. He acknowledged something wrong, check. He apologized to the victim, check. But there's still a third part here, isn't there? We saw with the robbery that Bode acknowledged why he did it, to escape Vince's voice. But we haven't really heard Bode acknowledge that his anger at his sister led to her death. Bode isn't someone that I would describe as an angry person. When I think about Bode, I usually think about him being caring and reckless. Sure, he does get angry, but that's usually reserved for things that would make people get angry, like when Odin is trying to kill Sharon. We see over and over again that Bode's anger is usually protective, but it appears on that night, Bode's anger turned onto a person who we know he cares about. So what gives? And I think the best answer to that question is that Bode needed to put his anger somewhere, and that somewhere ended up being onto Riley. But why is Bode so angry here? So much so that he won't even listen to Riley when she wants to get out of the car. And I think the answer to that question is that he learned it from growing up in an abusive household under a man who was always full of anger. The show doesn't even try to hide Vince's anger and how that anger quickly turns into abuse. It's there in the first scene that Bode and Vince share, When Vince goes into Bode's hospital room, we see Sharon and Bode hugging. They've just reconnected for the first time since Riley died. Vince immediately jumps to, "What the hell are you doing?" We see Bode swallow, and Sharon looks fearful. They are both bracing for what Vince is going to do. What exactly he does do is anyone's guess because we don't see the rest of the scene. In the next episode, we pick up outside the hospital. Vince and Sharon are arguing about what should happen to Bode. Vince thinks Bode should go back to prison and can't even follow orders. Sharon thinks it's ridiculous to suggest that Bode be sent back to prison for saving Jake. Bode responds to remind Vince that Bode followed the order to leave town. As a quick aside, this scene is one of the main reasons I don't think Vince was ever physically abusive, aside from what we see the night Riley died. Bode is fearful in the hospital room, sure, but once we take over to Fresh Prince of Edgewater, we see Bode fight back over and over again when Vince is abusive. To me, this is saying Bode isn't afraid that Vince is going to physically hurt him, and he's not about to let Vince just keep hurting him emotionally. The next time Bode and Vince see each other is at the rec center. In this scene, Vince yells at Bode for fighting a fire competently despite only having a glorified garden hose. Actually, over on Reddit, there was a retired CAL FIRE division chief who did a great breakdown of this episode, and she said this part is confusing because Bode is right. Every drop does help. If you ask me, this is more tied to Eve and Jake messing up fighting a fire earlier in the day because they were arguing. Vince is still pissed that they screwed up and he's taking that anger out on Bode. Jake messes up again in the next episode. You see earlier in that episode, Vince tells Jake that Bode hit Jake because Bode was jealous of how awesome Jake is. But reality hits him really hard in the face when Jake nearly gets them killed by Mojave. At the end of the episode, Vince goes to apologize to Bode, but every word is still abusive. If I had to sum the apology up in one sentence to explain what Bode hears, I would say, "Sorry I picked Jake over you as a son, he just likes me more." Which I think to Bode shows him that Vince hasn't changed, even if he's at 3 Rock apologizing because Sharon told him to. Eventually, Bode walks away and Vince looks like he has no idea what went wrong. While Bode walks out of that visit, we know that Vince goes back to have more conversations with him, but they don't go well, at least not at first. By the next episode, Bode intends to take Vince off his visiting list, so Bode will only have to see him at work. But at the end of the episode, when Vince almost dies, Bode says he's glad his dad is okay, and Vince promises to work harder at repairing his relationship with Bode. After this, Vince's abusive behaviors do fall off. That isn't to say Vince doesn't do mean or even abusive things when he gets mad at Bode, even up until the night he died. But they are far fewer and longer stretches in between. By the episode Get Some Be Safe, the episode after Vince nearly dies, Vince nearly risks his life to save Bode from a barn fire, and a few episodes later, Vince tries to take the fall for Bode in the investigation into Meg's death. He says it's because Bode going back to prison would hurt Sharon, but this definitely qualifies as a "sure, keep telling yourself that, bud" moment. Vince's abuse didn't start and end at making Bode feel like he wasn't enough. We also see that Vince wanted to make sure that everyone else sees Bode the way that he did, and we really get the best picture of that in Fresh Prince. At the top of the episode, he encourages Eve and Jake to not hold back on their incident report about Bode punching Jake. Vince tells them that Manny needs to know that Bode is dangerous. When Jake and Eve blunder at that fire that I think provoked Vince's later abuse of Bode, Vince tells them that they're supposed to be the reliable ones. After Vince gets done yelling at Bode for being in the way, he praises Jake with everyone right there. In the next episode where there's smoke, Vince confidently tells Jake that the reason Bode punched him is because Jake is everything Bode wishes he was. Boy, is Vince shocked when he learns the real reason. It's no different when it comes to Sharon. In Fresh Prince, Vince tries to make her see Bode as bad twice. First in that Bode is incapable of following orders conversation, and later reframing his sending Bode away from Edgewater the night Riley died as protecting their marriage. Vince also tells her that Jake is going to tell Manny the truth about Bode punching him, so Bode is for sure getting sent away, as if he didn't tell Jake to tell Manny that Bode is dangerous. With Manny, Bode's captain, same thing. Manny addresses Vince's very obvious abuse of Bode by telling Vince that Bode did great. singling him out for praise. Vince lets Manny know that he got good Bode, but good Bode is just a way of luring people in to break their hearts. And then, even though Vince is doing better by the time we get around to get some be safe, he still questions Manny over why he named Bode First Saw. Manny implies he made Bode First Saw because Vince is his dad, something Freddie told us at the beginning of the episode was not true, and this sets Bode up for Vince being overcritical of him when they work together. To be fair to Vince, though, we do get an "aw, they do love each other" moment at the end of the episode. Again, these aren't all of the actions that Vince takes that shapes people's perception of Bode, but they're enough to see the pattern. It isn't enough that Vince thinks Bode is bad. He needs everyone else in his orbit to confirm that yes, Bode is bad. Even laying all of this out, it's easy to dismiss this obvious abuse as being a product of anger that Vince built up after Bode left. That he tells himself that Bode is bad so he doesn't feel bad for banishing Bode. And that's a fair take. Or it would be if we didn't hear about what life was like before Riley died. We really get the bulk of the "this is how Vince is" information in Where There's Smoke. At the top of the episode, Sharon and Vince argue about Sharon using her kidney disease to keep Bode at 3 Rock. Vince says this is like when Bode was a teen. He would say discipline and consequence, and she would coddle. Sharon tells Vince this isn't like when they lived together as a family. He can't just start barking out orders like he's the boss. Then, at the end of the episode, Bode recalls how the family worked when he was growing up. Bode was the problem and the disappointment. Bode feels like after Vince drove him away, Vince reformed their family and cast Bode as the one who tried to destroy it. Bode knows Sharon wants to be a family again, but if Vince is going to act the same way he did back then, Bode doesn't want to be a member of that family. 2 episodes later in Get Some Be Safe, we see Luke for the first time, and if you wonder why I include Luke as part of the immediate family, here's why. He goes to visit Bode at 3 Rock, and he jokes that Vince always wanted Bode to be a part of CAL FIRE. Bode reminds Luke that what Vince wanted was for Bode to be a civilian firefighter, not an inmate. Luke is disappointed that Vince is giving Bode a hard time, but the two agree that this is just how Vince has always been, even if Bode didn't deserve it. 5 episodes later, after Vince gets Bode out of trouble for Meg's death, we see that Vince is excited for Bode to work at the station for the day and wants to tell Bode how proud he is of him. But since this is network TV, we can't just have a sweet wholesome episode about the abusive dad saying he's proud of his son. A box truck crashes into the station, causing an inmate named Charlie to get pinned under a fire truck. Charlie is understandably upset by this, not the least of which because he wanted to become a firefighter and now he thinks he will lose his leg and his dream will die. Bode tells Charlie not to give up yet. He recalls that growing up, Vince made him feel like he wasn't worthy of being CAL FIRE or a Leone, so much so that Station 42 was the last place Bode ever wanted to be, but now Bode realized that he can be CAL FIRE, whether he deserves to be a firefighter or not. Unbeknownst to Bode, Vince is standing right there. Vince is visibly upset, and after a brief moment of eye contact between father and son, he walks away. I know I am trying really hard to stay grounded in Season 1, but I want to skip ahead to Season 3 real quick. In the episode Fare Thee Well, we hear both Vince and Bode acknowledge that when Bode was a teenager, Vince would get so angry, sometimes Bode would hide at Jake's house until he cooled off. One time it took 2 weeks. Quick aside, Lily, I know that you are unequivocally the best parent on the show, but what are you doing? Are you not at all concerned about the fact that Vince blows up at his kid so bad that the kid has to go hide for a week, but always goes back? Do you not think something needs to be done? You are a doctor, a mandated reporter, and you're just doing nothing. Nope, cannot get distracted. This is not the Lily essay, not yet anyway. The thing is, though, this pattern of Vince blowing up, being mad for a little while, and then calming down is very consistent for Vince across all 3 seasons. Bode does something, Vince gets pissed off, and he lashes out. When questioned, he insists that he is correct. He tries to shape the perception of others around the event. But when the fact that he isn't correct is shoved in his face in a way that he can't just deny it, he gets upset like he never saw it in that way, even though it's a clear pattern, and there's a reason for that. Just like how Bode's bad treatment of Riley is the result of anger and itself the product of abuse and not having a way to deal with his emotions, Vince's abuse also comes from anger as a result of long-term abuse. from Vince's father. We don't meet Walter Leone until the season 1 episode At the End of My Rope, which is in the middle of the Drugs at Camp arc. However, for me to do the rest of these Leone family essays, I've got to explain Walter. You've got to see the scaffolding underneath to begin to understand why Vince is the way he is. And that's going to be my next essay.